It was a crisp morning in late September, the kind of morning that feels fresh and full of promise. Birthdays have always been special in our family, but this one, it carried a strange weight I couldn't name. Something unspoken lingered in the air. I sat at the kitchen table, my favorite coffee mug warming my hands. The smell of fresh pancakes drifted from the stove, sunlight streaming through the window in golden ribbons. Everything should have felt perfect. But as my son walked into the room, I noticed his smile didn't quite reach his eyes. He placed a small, wrapped box in front of me. "Happy birthday, Dad," he said softly. Then he just stood there, as if he had something more to say but couldn't find the words. I chuckled, trying to lighten the mood. "Come on, son. Sit down before the coffee gets cold." He sat, but his hands fidgeted against the table, restless and unsure. Then, without warning, he reached out, took my hand, and held it tight. His eyes locked onto mine in a way that made the world around us fade into silence. "Dad," he said, voice steady but low, "a famous pastor knows about your Alzheimer's." For a moment, my heart stopped. The room seemed to still, like even the clock on the wall was holding its breath. My son's words hung in the air, heavy and strange. I didn't know whether to laugh, to cry, or to ask 100 questions all at once. Alzheimer's. The word itself was a shadow that had been following me for months, maybe years. But how did a famous pastor, someone I had never met, know about it? And why did my son look at me like he was carrying the weight of the world? I took a deep breath, searching for something to say, but my thoughts tangled. I've learned that Alzheimer's can turn even simple moments into puzzles, but this puzzle was wrapped in something much bigger. He squeezed my hand and said, "I need you to hear the whole story before you say anything." His voice was calm, but I could feel his pulse quicken through his grip. I nodded slowly, not because I understood, but because I could tell whatever he was about to share would change the way I looked at my life, and maybe my illness. In that moment, memories flashed, my son as a boy, running through the yard with scraped knees and wild hair, the day he graduated, the look on his face when he became a father himself. All those moments felt sharp and vivid, as if my mind knew I'd need them right now to remind me of who I was. A part of me wanted to believe this was just another odd turn in my life story, something I'd laugh about later. But deep down, I knew this wasn't just a message. It was a thread connecting my illness to something or someone far greater than I could understand. I didn't know yet what the pastor's message was, or why it had come through my son. But a quiet part of me sensed this birthday would be remembered, not for cake or candles, but for something far deeper. And so, I leaned back in my chair, still holding his hand, and said, "All right, son, tell me everything." Because sometimes the most important stories aren't the ones you plan to hear. They're the ones that arrive unannounced, on the days you least expect, and they have the power to turn your whole life in a new direction. Before Alzheimer's had a name in my life, it was just life. And life, for me, was full. I was a man with a job I loved, a family I adored, and a mind that I trusted to hold everything that mattered. I had been working as a small-town contractor for more than 20 years. My days were filled with the smell of sawdust, the sound of hammers striking nails, and the satisfaction of seeing something rise from nothing. I loved the rhythm of it, the way a project took shape in my mind before it ever existed in the real world. I remember driving my old red pickup truck through town, windows down, country radio humming in the background. People would wave as I passed, because in a small town, everyone knows your name. I liked that. I liked being a man people could depend on. And at home? That was my real joy. My wife and I had been married for over 3 decades, and though we had our share of storms, we'd always found our way back to calm waters. My son grew up in that environment, steady, loving, maybe a little stubborn. He was my shadow when he was little, following me around with a plastic hammer in his hand, helping me build things. Sundays were for church and big family lunches. I sang in the choir, though I'm not sure anyone would call me choir material. Still, I believed in showing up, in giving what I could. Faith wasn't just a word for me, it was the lens through which I saw my life. I can still remember the feeling of sitting at the dinner table, hearing my son tell me about his first job, his first car, his first heartbreak. I never knew which stories would stick in my memory, but I knew I wanted him to feel heard, always. I was also the kind of man who kept mental lists, groceries we needed, bills to pay, birthdays to remember. My mind was my filing cabinet, and it rarely failed me. I took pride in that. In those days, I could work 12 hours and still come home with energy to spare. I could recall the serial number on a piece of equipment without even looking at it. I could tell you exactly where every tool in my shop was, even the ones I hadn't touched in months. Looking back now, it's strange to think how much I took for granted. The ease of remembering. The confidence of knowing my mind was sharp. The belief that I had decades ahead of me without any serious health concerns. There was laughter in our home, so much laughter. We had traditions, like Friday movie nights and Saturday morning pancakes. On my birthday, my wife would always make chocolate cake with her mother's old recipe. My son would give me something he'd made with his own hands. Those little rituals made life feel unshakable. I had plans, too. I wanted to travel more with my wife, maybe see the Grand Canyon. I wanted to teach my grandkids how to hold a hammer, how to sand a piece of wood until it was smooth enough to shine. I thought there would be time. But what I didn't know, what none of us knew, was that life was quietly setting up a different plan for me. A plan that would test every part of who I was, my patience, my strength, my faith. Even now, when I look back, I can see the early signs were there. Misplacing my keys more often. Forgetting small details from conversations. But at the time, I laughed them off. Guess I'm getting older, I'd say. And life went on, because that's what life does, it moves forward, whether you're ready for the changes or not. I didn't realize it then, but those little slips were the first cracks in the foundation of the life I had built. And just like in construction, once the foundation shifts, the whole structure changes. Before Alzheimer's, I was a man defined by what I could build, remember, and give. I never thought that one day I'd have to learn how to be a man who measures his worth in other ways that had nothing to do with a sharp mind. And if I'm being honest, that was the hardest part to accept. I didn't just fear losing my memory, I feared losing the version of myself that my family had always known. The man who could fix anything, remember everything, and carry everyone. But I suppose that's why I'm telling this story now. Because to understand what this journey has meant, you first have to understand the man I was before it began. It started with the little things. A misplaced wallet. A conversation I couldn't quite remember. A name that slipped my mind, even though I'd known the person for years. At first, I brushed it off. Just stress, I told myself. Just getting older. But the little things started to add up. One morning, I found myself standing in the middle of my workshop, staring at a half-built cabinet I'd been working on for weeks. My hands rested on the wood, but my mind felt blank. I couldn't remember what step came next. It wasn't like me. I'd been building cabinets for decades, and I could normally work through the process in my sleep. That moment left me rattled. My wife noticed too. She started leaving notes on the fridge, reminders on the kitchen counter. She told me gently, "You've been forgetting things more often lately." I laughed it off, but inside, I felt a quiet panic growing. Then came the day I got lost driving home from the hardware store. It was a route I had taken hundreds of times. I pulled over on the side of the road, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles went white. I sat there for 10 minutes, trying to piece together where I was. Eventually, it came back to me, but that was the moment I knew I couldn't ignore it anymore. I'd booked an appointment with my doctor. I remember sitting in that waiting room, my knee bouncing up and down like it had a mind of its own. The smell of antiseptic and coffee lingered in the air. I flipped through an old magazine without reading a single word. My wife sat beside me, her hand on mine. She didn't say much, but her silence said everything. She was scared too. When my name was called, the walk down that hallway felt longer than it should have. The exam room was cold. The paper on the table crinkled loudly when I sat down, the sound too sharp in my ears. The doctor asked me questions, simple ones, at first. My birthday. The year. Who the president was. Then he asked me to remember 3 words and repeat them later. I remember thinking, this is silly. I'll remember them easily. But 10 minutes later, the words were gone. Just gone. There were blood tests, scans, and more questions. Days turned into weeks, and the waiting felt endless. I told myself maybe it was something else, stress, vitamin deficiency, anything but what I feared most. When the call finally came to come in for the results, my stomach knotted so tightly I could barely eat that morning. The doctor's office was quiet when we arrived, the kind of quiet that feels heavy. He sat across from me, his hands folded on the desk. He didn't rush into it. He spoke slowly, clearly, as if every word had weight. "Mr. Thompson," he said, "the results show early onset Alzheimer's." For a second, I thought I'd misheard him. The room felt smaller. The air seemed thinner. My ears rang. I looked at my wife, and I saw her eyes fill with tears before I even processed my own reaction. The word Alzheimer's echoed in my mind like a church bell in an empty town. My thoughts jumped to my father, how I watched him grow smaller in his own mind before he passed. I thought about my son, about what this would mean for him. I thought about the projects I hadn't finished yet, the trips I'd never taken, the moments I might never get to remember. The doctor talked about treatment plans, lifestyle changes, and the importance of early intervention. I nodded, but most of it washed over me like water on stone. Inside, I felt a strange mix of emotions, fear, sadness, and, strangely, relief. Relief that I finally had a name for what had been happening. Relief that it wasn't all in my head. On the drive home, neither of us said much. The trees along the roadside blurred past the window. My wife reached over and placed her hand on my knee. That single gesture said more than words ever could, "We're in this together." When we got home, my son was there. He had taken the day off work. I saw the worry in his eyes the moment I walked through the door. I tried to smile, but my voice cracked when I told him the news. He hugged me tightly, and for the first time in years, I felt like he was holding me up instead of the other way around. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat in the living room in the dark, listening to the sound of the clock ticking. Every tick felt like a reminder time was moving forward, with or without my memories. But in the middle of that darkness, something shifted in me. If my mind was going to lose pieces of my life, then I would make sure the moments I had left were worth remembering. Not just for me, but for the people I loved. I made a quiet promise to myself: Alzheimer's would change my life, but it would not take the heart of who I was. That promise became my anchor. I didn't know it then, but it was also the first step toward the day my son would sit across from me on my birthday and tell me a famous pastor knew my story. The next day, I opened my workshop at dawn and finished a single, stubborn step on that cabinet, sanding one panel until it felt like glass. It was ordinary work, but it steadied me. That afternoon, my wife and I made a list on a yellow pad: appointments, routines, people to call, joys to keep. We underlined joys. I prayed for courage, gentleness. Seemed minor, but they felt like footholds on a hill. My birthday morning began quietly, with the kind of stillness that makes you notice every small sound: the hum of the refrigerator, the creak of the floorboards, the faint chirping of birds outside. I was in the kitchen, cradling my coffee like it was the only thing holding me upright. I'd been thinking about birthdays differently lately. In the past, they were just markers on a calendar: another year older, another slice of cake. But now, every birthday felt heavier. More significant. It wasn't just another year older. It was another year closer to, well, I didn't let myself finish the thought. The back door opened, and in walked my son. He was carrying a grocery bag in one hand and a small wrapped box in the other. His smile came quickly, but it didn't stick. I'd learned to notice those tiny cracks in people's faces. When you live with Alzheimer's, you become an expert at reading unspoken worry. "Happy birthday, Dad," he said, setting the grocery bag on the counter. I noticed his voice was softer than usual, like he was trying not to wake something. "Morning, son," I replied. "What VE you got there?" "Just some things for breakfast. Figured we could eat together." We sat down at the table. The smell of fresh bread and coffee wrapped around us. He poured orange juice into 2 glasses, but his hands moved slower than usual. "You all right?" I asked. He hesitated, then nodded quickly. "Yeah. Just been thinking about something." I raised an eyebrow. Thinking about what? Instead of answering, he reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out the small gift. It was wrapped in plain brown paper, tied with a simple string. I could feel the weight of it in my hands, not just the physical weight, but the meaning behind it. "Open it," he said. Inside was an old leather-bound Bible. It wasn't new, the cover was worn, the pages slightly yellowed. When I flipped it open, I noticed handwriting in the margins. Notes, underlines, small prayers. "This belonged to someone you know," my son said quietly. I looked at him, confused. "Who?" He took a deep breath, then reached across the table and took my hand. His grip was firm, like he was grounding both of us. "Dad, a famous pastor knows about your Alzheimer's." The words landed heavy. Just like the first time he said them earlier that morning, they didn't make immediate sense. I blinked at him. "What do you mean, knows?" He explained slowly, like every detail mattered. A few weeks earlier, he had written to this pastor, a man whose sermons I had listened to for years, though we had never met. He'd told him about my diagnosis, about the kind of man I used to be, about the way I was fighting to hold on to the pieces of myself that mattered most. "He read your story, Dad. And he told me to give you this." My son tapped the Bible gently. "He said it belonged to his father. He wanted you to have it because he believes your story isn't over. He said he'd be praying for you every day." I sat there, staring at the book. My fingers traced the grooves in the leather. The pastor's father's Bible. I could feel the history in it, the weight of years, the faith of a man I'd never known but somehow felt connected to. For a moment, I couldn't speak. My son's eyes searched mine, looking for something, maybe gratitude, maybe understanding, maybe hope. "Why did you tell him?" I finally asked, my voice quiet. "Because," my son said, his own voice trembling, "I wanted you to know you're not alone in this. I wanted someone outside our family to carry part of this with us. Someone I knew you respected. Someone who could remind you that your life still matters every single day." I looked at him, my grown son, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like the roles had reversed. He was the one protecting me. Tears came, uninvited but unstoppable. "I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything," he replied. "Just keep living. Keep being you. That's enough." We sat there in silence, hands still joined, the Bible resting between us. Outside, the world kept moving, cars passed, birds sang, but in that kitchen, time slowed. I thought about the years ahead, about the uncertainty, about the memories I might lose. But holding that Bible, hearing my son's words, I realized there were some things Alzheimer's couldn't touch: love, faith, and the bond between a father and son. As I held the book, a memory came, my son at 8 years old, standing on a chair to help me frost my birthday cake, his small hands making a mess of the icing. He had been so proud of that lopsided cake, and I had told him it was the best one I'd ever had. In that moment, I realized he was still giving me the same gift he always had: love, wrapped in whatever form he could offer. I reached over and squeezed his hand. "Thank you, son. For this. For everything." He smiled, and this time it reached his eyes. Before he left that day, he paused at the doorway, looking back at me with an expression I couldn't quite read, part worry, part hope. "Dad, we'll get through this. Together." I nodded. Together. Breakfast that morning tasted different. Not because of the food, but because of the meaning woven into every bite. We didn't talk much more about the pastor. We didn't need to. The gift had already said it all. Later that day, after my son left, I sat alone at the table with the Bible open in front of me. I read some of the underlined verses, hearing the faint echo of the man who once held this book and prayed over it. One verse stood out, as if it had been left there just for me: "Do not fear, for I am with you." And I believed it, not because the road ahead would be easy, but because I knew I wouldn't be walking it alone. I had heard the pastor's voice for years, through Sunday sermons on the radio, short clips my son would send me, even a few televised broadcasts. He wasn't just any preacher, he had a way of speaking that made you feel like he was sitting in your living room, looking you right in the eye. I admired that. But still, I had never met him, never expected my life to cross paths with his in any real way. The day after my birthday, my son came over again, carrying a folded letter. "Dad," he said, "you should probably read this." It was handwritten, in neat, deliberate script. "Dear Mr. Thompson, your son reached out to me a few weeks ago. He told me about the man you are, a father who built his life with hard work, faith, and love. He told me about your diagnosis. And he told me that you have always been the one holding others up. I want you to know I have been praying for you every day since I heard your name. I have walked with my own father through illness, and I understand the courage it takes to keep living fully in the middle of uncertainty. I'm sending you my father's Bible, not as a token, but as a reminder that the Word of God and the love of others are things no illness can take from you. My father read from this book every morning until his last day. I hope it will bring you the same comfort it brought him. With respect and prayer, Pastor David Carter." I must have read that letter 10 times, letting each sentence sink in. There was something about his words that didn't just acknowledge my illness, they acknowledged me. Not as a patient, but as a man. I looked at my son. "You didn't tell me you wrote to him." He shrugged. "Didn't know if he'd reply. Didn't want to get your hopes up." "How did you even know how to reach him?" "I just tried. Sent an email to his ministry. Didn't think I'd hear back." But the next morning, someone from his team called me. They said Pastor Carter had read my message personally and wanted to write to you himself. I set the letter down and picked up the Bible again. I flipped through the pages slowly, like I was touching something fragile. Inside the front cover, there was a short inscription in faded ink: "To my son, David." Never forget the author behind these words. "Love, Dad." That's when it hit me. This wasn't just a gift. This was something a father had passed to a son, and now that son was passing it to me. It felt like I had been invited into a chain of fathers and sons, all linked by love and faith. Over the next week, I began reading from that Bible every morning. Not much, sometimes just a verse or two, but I found myself underlining passages the way Pastor Carter's father had. It made me feel less alone, like I was part of an ongoing conversation that had started long before me. One morning, as I read, I found a verse that Pastor Carter's father had highlighted: "Even to your old age and gray hairs I am he who will sustain you." The words felt like a direct reply to my fear, the fear of losing myself piece by piece. A few days later, something unexpected happened. My son walked into the kitchen with his phone in his hand, his eyes wide. "Dad, Pastor Carter wants to talk to you." I froze. "Talk to me?" "He's doing a video call. Right now. He said it'll just be a few minutes." Before I could talk myself out of it, my son pressed a button, and there he was, Pastor Carter, smiling warmly from his office. "Mr. Thompson," he said, "it's good to see you." I didn't know what to say. "It's good to see you too, Pastor." We talked for about 15 minutes. He asked me about my family, my work, my favorite parts of the day. Not once did he make me feel like I was being pitted. Instead, he spoke to me as though I still had more to give, more to live for. "Before we ended the call," he said, "you may forget some things, Mr. Thompson. But remember this: your life is still a gift to the people around you. And it will be, every day you're here." When the call ended, I just sat there, staring at the screen. My son smiled. "Told you it would mean something." And he was right. The connection to the pastor didn't cure me, but it did something I hadn't felt in a while: it lifted the weight. Just a little. It reminded me that even though I couldn't control what Alzheimer's would take, I could still choose what I gave. That night, before bed, I opened the Bible again and found another note in the margin. In small handwriting, it said, "Faith is remembering who holds you, even when you forget everything else." I closed the book, placed it on my nightstand, and felt a strange peace. I didn't know what the next months would bring, but I knew this: my story had reached someone I respected deeply. And in return, his father's faith, and his, had reached me. In the days after my conversation with Pastor Carter, something shifted inside me. I can't say it was a grand, dramatic change. It was quieter than that, more like a steady warmth settling in, the kind you don't notice until you realize the chill is gone. I began starting my mornings differently. Instead of staring at the kitchen table, lost in thought, I would open the Bible he had sent. I'd read a single passage, underline a word or two, and let the meaning sit with me like a slow cup of coffee. Sometimes I didn't fully understand the verse, but that didn't matter. What mattered was the act of showing up for it and for myself. My son started coming over more often. Not just to check on me, but to be with me. We'd sit outside on the porch, him with his iced tea, me with my black coffee, talking about nothing and everything. Sometimes we'd bring the Bible out and read a verse together. Other times we just sat in comfortable silence, letting the breeze do the talking. There was one afternoon I'll never forget. My son asked, "Dad, are you scared?" I thought about it for a moment. Sometimes. But not as much as I was. "Why's that?" he asked. I tapped the Bible resting on the table between us. "Because this reminds me I'm not doing this alone. You, your mom, Pastor Carter, and God. That's a lot of company." He smiled in that way he does when he's trying not to get emotional. I also began making a list, a different kind of list than the ones I used to keep for work. This one was titled, "Things I Still Can Do." I wrote down simple things: cook breakfast, call an old friend, sand a piece of wood until it feels smooth, tell my son I love him. It wasn't about ignoring what I was losing, it was about remembering what I still had. One Sunday, my wife suggested we go back to church. I'd been hesitant, worried people would treat me differently. But when we walked in, I was met with handshakes, hugs, and familiar smiles. Word must have spread about my diagnosis, but instead of pity, I felt presence. People were just glad I was there. The service that day was about endurance, about running the race even when you're tired, even when the finish line feels far away. I found myself gripping the pew a little tighter. When we sang the final hymn, I didn't remember all the words, but I sang anyway. At home, I began tackling small projects again. I knew I couldn't work the way I used to, but that didn't mean I couldn't create. I built a simple wooden bench for the front porch. My son helped with the heavy lifting, but I did most of the sanding myself. When it was done, I carved 3 words into the side, still holding on. Life wasn't suddenly easy. There were still days when I misplaced things, forgot plans, or lost my train of thought mid-sentence. But now, those moments didn't crush me the way they used to. When frustration bubbled up, I'd look at that bench, or the Bible, or my son's face, and I'd remember the promise I made to keep living fully, however much fully might change. The biggest change, though, was in how I saw time. Before, I'd look ahead with dread, measuring life by what I might lose. Now, I started looking at life one day at a time. Mornings became a gift. Conversations became a treasure. A shared laugh felt like a victory. One evening, my son said, "You seem lighter lately." "I think I am," I told him. Turns out, when someone believes in you, it makes it a little easier to believe in yourself. That's what the pastor's gift had done for me. It wasn't just a Bible. It was a reminder that I still mattered to my family, to people I'd never even met, and to God. And when you know you matter, you start living like it. When I look back now, I realize my birthday wasn't just a turning point, it was a reminder that life, even in its hardest seasons, can still surprise you with moments of grace. Before that day, I thought my story was shrinking. Alzheimer's felt like a thief, slowly stealing my memories, my independence, the pieces that made me who I am. But my son's gift, and the pastor's words, showed me something I hadn't expected. Even as some parts of my life grow smaller, other parts can grow larger. Deeper. Stronger. I've learned that the value of a life isn't measured by how much you can remember, it's measured by how much love you give and receive along the way. And in that sense, I have more than enough. There are still hard days. There are mornings when I forget what I was about to do, or evenings when I lose the thread of a conversation halfway through. Those moments still sting. But now, instead of letting them define me, I let them pass. I've stopped asking, "Why me?" and started asking, "What now?" What now is cherishing every laugh with my wife. What now is sitting on the porch with my son, talking about old times. What now is reading from that worn Bible every morning, knowing it has carried the faith of three men: Pastor Carter's father, Pastor Carter, and now me. I've also learned that you don't have to have all your pieces in place to be a blessing to someone else. In fact, sometimes it's your cracks that let the light shine through. I may not be able to remember every detail, but I can still encourage, still hug, still listen, still love. If you're watching this and you or someone you love is facing Alzheimer's or any illness that makes the future uncertain, I want you to know something: you are still you. You are still worthy of love, respect, and joy. Your story isn't over, and it doesn't have to be defined only by what you've lost. Surround yourself with people who see more than your illness. Let them carry some of the weight with you. Accept their help, not because you're weak, but because love was never meant to be a solo act. And if you can, find something to hold on to. For me, it's that Bible and the message it carries. For you, it might be a song, a photograph, a promise you've made to yourself. Whatever it is, let it anchor you when the days get hard. I think about that birthday often. Not the cake or the candles, I honestly couldn't tell you what flavor the cake was. But I will always remember the feeling of my son's hand holding mine, his voice steady as he told me about the pastor. I'll remember the weight of that leather Bible in my hands, the smell of its pages, the quiet understanding that I wasn't walking this road alone. And maybe that's the real miracle, that in a moment I thought would be about loss, I found connection. In the middle of forgetting, I found something unforgettable. So I'm telling my story here not because it's perfect or polished, but because it's real. And maybe someone out there needs to hear that hope isn't reserved for the healthy. Hope is for all of us, every day we wake up and choose to live it. Before I finish, I want to say this: if you've been moved by what you've heard today, don't just keep it to yourself. Share it with someone who needs encouragement. Reach out to someone who might be feeling alone in their struggle. Be the voice, the letter, the gift that reminds them their story still matters. And if you want to walk with me on this journey through the good days, the hard days, and the in-between, I'd be honored to have you join me. Because even though my memory may fade, my gratitude for this life, and for the people in it, will always remain. So, from my heart to yours, thank you for listening, thank you for caring, and thank you for believing that stories like mine are worth telling. Make sure you subscribe to this channel, like this video, and share it with someone who might need a little light in their day. And remember, no matter where you are, no matter what you're facing, you are never walking alone.